Hello, my name is Nathan. Everything I say and do is just as stupid as it is crazy. Just a warning. And welcome to episode 1 of the Marvel Cinematic University. I'm not actually trying to teach you anything, I just thought that name was funny. My bad. Despite actually being the 5th movie made, it still takes place about 50 years before Captain Marvel, which takes place about 20 years before anything else. So let me start off by saying I was originally going to make this as part of my Kubrick and Kingdom Hearts series, just much later on. But it turns out it takes a really long time to do all the stuff I want to do with that series, so I've decided just to make this its own thing. Still, I want to make a primary note that I'm first and foremost a Stanley Kubrick fan, and that the MCU is the one thing I've seen that's most like Kubrick's movies, without being super obvious about it, other than Kingdom Hearts. And, though I want this series to be more focused on Marvel, I don't think I can do it justice without pointing out those similarities and possible homages when I see them. Such as this bit in the beginning of Captain America: The First Avenger, which might be paying homage to 2001: A Space Odyssey, where they uncover the monolith on the moon in the second part of the film. The movie itself is separated into 4 acts. First is about self-discovery, being granted from a higher power the ability to do things for yourself that you couldn't do before, and put you a step above your peers. The second part is about the flow of information concerning something entirely new. The third is about an odyssey, hence the space odyssey part, to distant places and the dangers involved in getting there. And the last part is a journey across time and space to areas unknown. This is just an example of the things I might point out concerning Kubrick's movies and the MCU. This first scene in Captain America reminds me of the part in 2001 where they go to the moon. Like I said, it's interesting that during this same section, Haywood Floyd tells people concerning this new discovery that
Sure, you're all aware of the extremely grave potential for cultural shock and social disorientation contained in this present situation. If the facts were prematurely and suddenly made public without adequate preparation and conditioning.
And this is exactly what they try to do to Cap towards the end of the movie. Introduce him to new information slowly, except it doesn't work at all.
Look, I'm sorry about that little show back there, but we thought it best to break it to you slowly.
Anyway, the scene is also kind of like the scene from Alien, so it probably doesn't mean anything. Don't mind me. Moving on. The next scene tells us it takes place in Norway, March 1942. Now, Norway was occupied by Germany during this time. The Germans invaded Norway in 1940 and remained in control of it until Germany surrendered in 1945. This means, at this time, the Nazis have every right to just come in and take whatever they want, unless they were acting specifically against Hitler's orders. This indicates that this isn't just when Red Skull finds the Tesseract. This is also the point when he breaks away from Hitler's rule and starts Hydra and fighting his war within a war just to prove that he's even more insane than Hitler. Not that I thought anyone would ever want that title, but Red Skull really tries to take it. Before I talk about anything else in this scene, let's take a look at the Hydra symbol, a skull with 6 tentacles attached. Based on a monster from Greek and Roman mythology, the Hydra couldn't be killed because as soon as you cut off one head, 2 more would take its place.
If they cut off one head, 2 more shall take its place. Hail Hydra.
That's what's meant to be shown here, as the tentacles coming off of it are all attached to the same skull in a multi-bodied serpent with 1 head. Also, that head is dead. But that might just be to represent Red Skull as the leader, perhaps? Others have pointed out that one group of tentacles spells out the number 666, but with the other side being a mirrored image, it could also be said that these are the numbers 999, meaning that this is a series of 3 69s. 1 9 to match each 6, and as I pointed out in the last Kubrick and Kingdom Hearts video, aside from being the number that Bill and Ted's are always thinking of,
if you guys are really us, what number are we thinking of? 69, dudes!
69 is also a representation of the yin-yang. One way to interpret the yin-yang is as a melding of good and evil, or how opposites are equal to what they're opposite to, just at the opposite end of the spectrum. In this case, Red Skull and Captain America, affected by the same experiment,
I can't imagine he'll succeed. Again.
are not cut from the same cloth. Red Skull craves power because that's all he was taught from the corrupted leaders that he followed. Captain America craves a place he belongs to in a society that doesn't want him. Though they have the same powers, there are no 2 other characters in the MCU who are less similar in personalities than Captain America and Red Skull. Next up in this scene, Red Skull points out this carving on the wall of Yggdrasil, the tree of the cosmos in Norse mythology that holds all 9 realms together. The roots of Yggdrasil, of which there are 3, stretch to different parts of the cosmos. One to Midgard, which is what they call Earth in Norse mythology, one to the realm of giants, and one to Hel, with one L, which is the Norse underworld, and it also stretches into Niflheim, the realm of the frost giants. And we know that this is the route that Red Skull pulls the Tesseract out of because of the Needhogg, a dragon snake thing that chews on this particular route. As a quick aside, though Needhogg slowly eats this particular route, it is not the only animal doing so. In myths about Yggdrasil, every type of animal will come to nibble on different parts of this tree, representing both the renewable nature of the universe, but also to show its ultimate mortality. Remember, even death must die, at least in Norse mythology and the Marvel Universe. Finally, Red Skull opens a secret drawer and takes out the Tesseract, which you all know now contains the Space Stone, which has the ability to create portals between space and time. Though Red Skull says this was once the jewel in Odin's treasure room, this is not true and is something made up by Marvel. It's not in Norse mythology in any way, but they call it the Tesseract, which is another word for a 4-dimensional hypercube. A hypercube is something that does, well, this. Forever. You'll notice that each cube is constantly changing into every other cube, but if kept stable in its primary cube shape, it's one small cube kept between 6 not quite cubes, but look like cubes at a particular angle. This is interesting because if you consider the Space Stone as being encapsulated in the center, it's being held in place by 6 sides, creating a trapezoidal cube on each side. A 6-side shape meant to contain great power. Makes me think of WandaVision for some reason.
Wait, what's a hex? Oh, it's what I'm calling the anomaly because of its hexagonal shape. It's starting to catch on.
Red Skull then kills an innocent guy and then burns down a village. You know, typical bad guy stuff. But we then cut to Brooklyn, and it's over a year later. Isn't that a bit weird though? It's 1942 in Norway, and then we're meant to know it's in Brooklyn because it's the Brooklyn Bridge, and that's a year later because the Nazis didn't retake Zhytomyr until November 1943, after losing for about a week. They'd taken it initially on July 9th, 1941, and we know it's not then because then the last scene was 1942. Anyway, this is wrong because Zhytomyr wasn't retaken until November 1943. We learn later that Steve takes a super soldier serum on June 23rd, or possibly the 22nd because newspapers report what happens yesterday. And later, when Captain America is doing a USO show, it's November 1943, which is when the Nazis would be retaking Zhytomyr. Also, there's another article saying that Italy is depressed after the Allies invaded, which they did in September of 1943. In our reality, there's no way that these events would all be in the same newspaper. And most of these events happened after Steve gets the serum on June 22nd. Oh, if you're wondering why I'm not mentioning the U-boat sightings or the Berlin bombing, it's because both these things were happening basically throughout the whole war, so it doesn't really nail anything down date-wise. So, we're somewhere on both September and November, which is taking place before June in 1943. Anyway, in this scene, we meet Steve, and then immediately learn of Steve's backstory. But it goes by so fast, I'm sure a lot of people missed it, but here it is in its entirety.
What'd your father die of?
Mustard gas. He was in the 107th Infantry. I was hoping I could be assigned.
Your mother?
She was a nurse in a TB ward. Got hit, couldn't shake it.
And what did we learn from all that? That both of his parents died in World War I. He grew up an orphan, and that he's trying to join the 101st Infantry, the same unit his father fought in. Now, I've heard others say that Steve has a fear of missing out, which is probably true. But I think what's more central to his character is that he sees being a soldier as part of his identity. Being a part of the 101st is just as important as joining the army because then he's following in his father's footsteps. Let's move on. Steve angers a dude, and then gets beat up by said dude. But in this process, he grabs a trash can lid, giving the first form of his shield, and the possible reason he chooses this design above all the others later on.
It'll allow you. What about this one? No, that's just a prototype. What's it made of?
Also, near the end of the film, we see a kid coming full circle with this, or full shield, I should say, as he's using a trash can with Captain America's shield design on it, combining Cap's first shield with his last. Bucky shows up and saves the day, but only to rub in Cap's face that he got everything that Steve ever wanted.
You get your orders?
107th. Sergeant James Barnes, shipping out for England first thing tomorrow.
He also confirms that the year is 1943 by giving him another newspaper saying that along with an advert for the World Exposition of tomorrow, an obvious representation of the World's Fair, something that still goes on today in some form, though it's less focused on showing off inventions as it once was. Okay, I'm going to go full crazy for a moment. The scene begins with Bucky and Steve walking down these stairs with fireworks going on all around them. This firework goes off and then slowly drifts down the screen as we pan down. It never completely dissipates. I'm only mentioning this because it's the only firework that doesn't disappear right away. Next is this double firework that for just an instant looks very much like eyes opening up as if some otherworldly being has taken a brief look into our world, or into their world, whatever. Also, many of these fireworks explode in X and O shapes, which are considered opposites thanks to the game Tic-Tac-Toe. As a final thing, is it weird to anyone else that none of these fireworks ever make a sound? The only sound heard outside of Steve and Bucky talking is that of the monorail more towards the foreground.
I don't see what the problem is. You're about to be the last eligible man in New York.
Returning to sanity now, Steve and Bucky go to the show, see a failed invention, but Steve ditches everyone to try to get recruited again, showing he's nothing if not driven. Hey Steve, are you ever going to quit reapplying for the army?
I'm on this all day.
Alright then. Well, here's a weird thing I noticed, but this scene seems to call back to the Norway scene. It's 6 people standing around a red dead thing, much like the Hydra symbol is 6 bodies attached to one head, and that head is dead. Also covered in red when blood drips down on it. Like this red car that dies and is surrounded by 6 bodies. Anyway, this is strange because outside of a callback, it doesn't really mean anything. I mean, Howard Stark is Tony's grandfather, the original Iron Man, so this isn't implying he's a Hydra agent. Right? Okay, this scene actually reminds me of 2 separate moments in Kubrick's films. The first, but less obvious one, it's towards the end of A Clockwork Orange where Alex is on the table, and the doctor and nurse are getting busy behind a curtain. Makes one wonder what she's actually whispering to him here. Anyway, the more obvious connection is the Eyes Wide Shut in Dr. Hartman's office. The Snellen charts, which are the eye charts, and both aren't official charts because the official charts are meant to only use the letters C, D, E, F, L, N, O, P, T, and Z. Not that anyone does. Actually, there are charts that match the one in Captain America out there, but not like the one in the Kubrick film. Others have said the chart in Eyes Wide Shut has the O at top to represent Hal, as if he's watching over the event in the same way he would be on David Bowman's journey to Jupiter. And wait, what's this in Captain America? Hal? Good morning, David. Anyway, they both do this thing where it's very hard to see the letters on the bottom of the chart, which is a shifting focus camera trick. But it does give the audience the impression that something is wrong with our vision. Being that this is from a movie called Eyes Wide Shut and showing us that our vision is blurred, it's as if the movie is saying that's not what we see, it's what we don't see. What's happening to other places while the audience is looking here. One more thing before moving on. I've seen this chart online, but it's kind of weird, isn't it? Makes me think it means something more than what's on the surface. The A for Avengers or America, the X and O dealing with opposites again, and maybe point towards the eventual civil war between the Avengers, and combined they make the X-Men symbol, which might point towards the eventual X-Men versus Avengers, but I'm really not here to speculate about the future of the MCU. Below that is a TV and H, which might indicate something about WandaVision, being that it's sitcoms on TV, and the H for Agatha Harkness. I'm really reaching for that one, except that one turns out to actually be right, so maybe. Anyway, Steve gets a free ride into the army, and the Captain America franchise can continue. The next scene comes to Dr. Zola and Red Skull talking Hydra's evil mountain lair number 35. Something to note, and is indicated by Zola's magnified face, is that Hydra, and Red Skull in particular, seem to suffer from a Napoleonic complex. Basically, everything they have has to be bigger and better than anything else around. Next is a series of training montages. And how can I not talk about Full Metal Jacket during this part? If you haven't seen a Full Metal Jacket, the boot camp section encompasses the entire first half of the film. And in it, there's a character known as Private Pyle, and Gunnery Sergeant Hartman singles him out. Mostly because he's not really cut out for the army in any way. You'll notice that Pyle in Full Metal Jacket is unable to complete any of the training exercises, and is often punished. Steve, likewise, is never able to complete any of the training. Even here, when Steve outsmarts the Get the Flag challenge, he still doesn't complete the running, and was trailing behind the whole way. Likewise, doesn't actually climb the pole either, so he fails at that too. Steve, just like Pyle, and just like the doctors told him to begin with, is not cut out for the army. Just a good thing that the mind is better than the body when choosing superheroes. Finally, to the point that Steve becomes Captain America. I'll just vaguely mention A Clockwork Orange again. Also, I'll mention Frankenstein. Actually, let's talk about that for a moment. Frankenstein is a story about a crazed scientist trying to make a more perfect man. In the book, the creature is quite intelligent and only seeks to understand himself. In the movie version, however, the monster isn't that smart. It is easily scared by fire.
We're done! I already have.
So we have two different versions of Frankenstein's monster. The book version, which is very intelligent, but is also very lonely, and the film version, which is dumb, monstrous, and misunderstood. Wait, what was I talking about? Oh yes, World War II. Well, something you may not know if all the information you got about this war was from this film, was that the Americans joined the war because of the Japanese sneak attack on Pearl Harbor. It happened when we were at our least suspecting and came out of nowhere. And being that a large majority of America's Navy was there at the time, it happened on a pier. And even though the attack was ultimately successful on the part of the Japanese, it was later reported that Emperor Hirohito said of the attack that what they did was awaken a sleeping giant and fill it with terrible resolve. Once the Americans joined the Allies, the defeat of the Axis powers was assured. But first, Americans needed a recruitment drive. They needed people to buy war bonds and get able-bodied men to join up. This was the biggest war in history, and America was coming full force. But one thing this movie doesn't cover is that this war for Americans was always a war against the Japanese, at least at first. While Germany was invading Western Russia and all of Europe simultaneously, Japan was invading China and Indonesia, and Italy was claiming land all over Africa. And every allied country was sending troops to every location there was fighting in. This movie would have you believe that Hitler was the main force behind the war, and that all the fighting was happening in Europe.
We'll personally escort Adolf Hitler to the gates of hell.
But this was a culmination of three main groups invading the entire world, and everyone else trying to stop their hostile global takeover. Towards the end of this sequence, Steve finds himself in Europe. This would be after the successful invasion of Italy by the Allies after September of 1943. Also in this scene is another Kubrick reference. In this case, there are dual eagle pillars facing each other, much like the Grady twins do in The Shining, while also being in a similar gold eagle design that's found in Ullman's office. And Steve is framed in between them, showing that he's caught in between the two versions of his American ideology. So he feels like a monkey. In the other ideology, he wants to fight. This isn't me speculating either. This is exactly what he and Peggy talk about in the next scene. During this breakout sequence, there's another quick Kubrick reference. You see the series of numbers and the words at the background. There's a slightly encoded 237 to the right and left of it, which was the room number in The Shine that's where all that bad stuff happened. Also during the sequence is the only reference to the fact that, from Americans' perspective, that this was a war with the Japanese.
What, are we taking everybody?
I'm from Fresno, Ace.
But being that this is not set up in any way, this would only make Dum Dum Dugan look kind of racist. Anyway, when Steve comes to save Bucky, Bucky's saying,
Sergeant, 3255,
which has another 237 encoded in it, just circling around backwards. But also has the 55, which mirrors the 88 on the side of the warhead, which, much like the Eagle statue from earlier, imply duality in twins. In the next scene, Steve mentions something about the Maginot Line, which was a real-life thing the French had to deter invasions. However, the Germans got around this deterrent by traversing through the lowlands. Because of this, the term has become synonymous with an expensive effort to give people a false sense of security, much like what Red Skull's Evil Mountain base becomes later in the film. Also, Bucky dies. We're skipping a few scenes. Now, remember that comparison I had to Japanese attacking World Harbor earlier? Well, this is similar in that the way the war between Japan ended was not by an endless battalion of people marching on the Japanese shores. We did it with a single airplane, carrying a very large bomb. Anyway, they invade the main base, and this sequence kind of reminds me of Dr. Strangelove, where the Americans invade their own base to try to stop General Ripper before it's too late. Actually, the sequence might have more to do with Dr. Strangelove than I think it does. And now we're at the last scene with Captain America. Well, other than the commercial for the upcoming Avengers movie. But this sequence mirrors the first sequence with him in the movie. Steve wakes up and notices immediately that something is wrong, namely that they're trying to convince him he's somewhere he's not because of their misuse of an anachronistic recording.
The game. It's from May 1941. I know because I was there.
Something that Steve blatantly misses in the original scene with the misleading newspapers. This is actually a very common Kubrick thing called mirroring. At least that's what I call it. It's when a later scene calls back to an earlier one, while that same earlier scene foreshadows the later one. It's not an entirely uncommon film technique, foreshadowing hints at what's to come, and callbacks imply what's come before. And when they do both simultaneously, then it creates a circle. And Kubrick was a master at cyclical storytelling. His movies, for the most part, started and ended in a similar way. Another reason to use mirroring is to create a connection between certain people, places, or things where there otherwise might not be, such as the case with the red dead head correlating to the red dead car later on. Drawing attention to the fact that while Steve and Red Skull are next to nothing alike, the two people in this movie most alike are Red Skull and Howard Stark, and by extension Tony Stark, as we can plainly see they have an awful lot in common.
Agent Carter, if we're not in too much of a hurry, I thought we could stop off in Lucerne for a late-night fondue.
Anyway, the things I'd like to shine a little more light on is this film connection to 2001: A Space Odyssey. One of the more obvious themes in 2001 is about the evolution of humankind. Though these are stories that have giant ramifications for humanity as a whole, Kubrick tells these tales from the perspective of individuals. The first section of the film is about Moonwatcher's personal evolution, just as the last section is about David Bowman's. Captain America might be a story focused on just one man, but it's a man with giant ramifications on the future of humanity.